again.
I am. It's great to see some familiar faces. Lovely to be with all of you today. Ruth, can I ask you? We're getting a little feedback from your mic, I think. So, my name is Nathan Stock. If there are folks who haven't met me, I'm an associate director in the conflict resolution program of the Carter Center. My background is actually in resolving Middle East conflicts, but since the summer of 2020, I've been back with the Carter Center. I returned to design and launch this project that in-house we call STAR, Strengthening Trust and Resilience, right here in the US of A. Over the next few minutes, I wanted to take an opportunity to outline for all of you how the work that the Carter Center is supporting via WisACT fits into a bigger picture. Because we are actually implementing somewhat similar initiatives in 5 other states. So I'd like to talk to you this afternoon about that bigger picture of Carter Center programming. I want to, in particular, explain the research we've been doing on communications and messaging, right? I'm sure you've heard from David and Scott and Allison that we're trying to organize Americans from across the political spectrum to act in part as community ambassadors, as messengers, as people who can share good information about elections, but more generally, take the temperature down in our discourse. We've been doing a lot behind the scenes to figure out exactly how do we do that? Exactly who do we try to talk to? What messaging may make sense for different target audiences? And then what role might all of you play, if you're so inclined, in helping us push this forward? So I really want to focus on the strategy and the research, and then Eric and myself sort of outline next steps. Does that make sense? Any questions on this? And I know we'll have some time for discussion after I present, and then Eric, we're going to break you up into small groups and get your feedback on all of this. But any initial questions? Does this all make sense? I might not be able to see you, so just jump right in if I'm missing you. All right, I don't see any hands raised. So, big picture in terms of what we've been doing. We are also working in Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Michigan, and North Carolina. And in those states, like Wisconsin, we have hired Republicans and Democrats, typically pairs of people, to build these cross-partisan civic networks, somewhat similar to WisACT. Nationwide, we have about 2,000 core active civic leaders in these networks. There's a faith pillar of this work, which some of you may have been exposed to, called Faith Forward Democracy. We've engaged, 25,000 plus faith leaders and laity with tools and messaging around how faith communities can support our democracy. We've been training folks, including, I think, many of you, on understanding polarization and what to do about it. And across these 6 states, we've been doing a lot of election education programming. We know that misunderstanding about elections, in some cases disinformation, questions about what happens when you cast your ballot, is there fraud, has been a driver that is undermining confidence in our democratic republic, and in some cases stoking violence. So across these states, we've been particularly focused on giving platforms for election administrators to explain what they do, right, in a way that hopefully builds confidence that when you, oops, sorry about that, I just stopped sharing my screen accidentally. Oops. All right, sorry. Give me 1 second. Man, hit the wrong button and all heck breaks loose. Okay, there we go. Okay, so election education programming, our Wisconsin team was up in Green Bay, earlier this week, last week, doing a tour of the election office there, where we brought local media in to cover, how does this work? What are the checks and balances around voting machines and things like that? What I want to talk to you about today is what is coming next and how we have been preparing for this communications and messaging operation. So the first thing we did across these 6 states, including in Wisconsin, was we convened some 4-hour brainstorming meetings. We invited folks from Wisconsin, as well as these other states, who were in-state messaging experts, people who had prior experience in strategic communications, political campaigns, media. We solicited input on, who should we be talking to and what should we say? And out of those conversations came an interest in engaging potentially 3 different audiences. We've called these, the core audiences were focused on the engaged and the disengaged. And I'm going to talk more in a minute about, how those audiences are different, who's who. What I will say right now is everybody on this call, we're in the engaged category. And as I'll share in a moment, the big distinction that I would draw your attention to between these 2 audience profiles is media diet. Who reads political news or reads a local newspaper or even watches TV news versus people who don't and who just are much less tuned into politics. And so out of those discussions, there was interest in engaging this core audience, people who are more civically active, also seeing if we could reach out to the next ring of people who, maybe are more infrequent voters, maybe less trustful of the system, but could be brought in. And there was even some discussion about, well, could we go even further and get to folks who are really, totally checked out, don't even know it's an election year. So put a pin in this for just a second. This is sort of the outcome of these conversations in Wisconsin and other states. The other thing we did in June, we worked with a polling firm that we've been engaging on this project for a while to run another set of baseline surveys in these target states for this project, including Wisconsin. And in these surveys, we asked lots of questions. I think you can kind of guess the gist, right? How confident are you in your state's ability to administer an election? Is violence ever okay, right? And there were a lot of findings coming out of this survey, but I'll share just a couple of highlights here. This is reported confidence in your state's ability to administer an election broken down by party. So on the right-hand side of the slide, you see base Democrats, soft or leaning Democrats, independents in the middle. On the left are base GOP. Surprisings here. The findings here, not super surprising, right? Democrats generally professing higher levels of confidence than Republicans. Another finding from the June survey, which is very consistent with national data, the vast majority of Americans reject political violence. Vast majority of Americans reject political violence. This is very important. In this case, we surveyed, 8 states, including Wisconsin. 83% say there's nothing that could happen around this election that would justify a violent response. Very consistent with long-running national trends. All right, so we ran this survey. Then we brought in our friends at GMMB, our strategic communications partner. You're going to hear from Eric in just a moment. Eric is with GMMB. GMMB has access to something called the Resonant Data Set. They can say more about this than me, but the basic idea is this is a ginormous database that draws on 3 buckets of data about our fellow Americans. One is voter file data, right? How do people vote in different places, right, around the country? Second, there's an enormous body of online cookie data, right? Everything we do on the web is getting tracked by somebody or other, even if it's anonymized. So there's an enormous amount of data about what people buy online, what social media we're on, or are we consuming news or just watching YouTube videos? And then finally, Resonant is bolstered by like 120,000 annual surveys where people are asked questions about political stuff, social stuff, cultural stuff, right? Okay, you get this enormous amount of data, and then you can ask the database questions. You can query to develop profiles of target audiences, and that is what our friends at GMMB did. They built 2 different profiles for each of the states on this project. One for our engaged Wisconsinites, right? People who are high propensity voters, higher trust Americans, whether they lean left or right. And then they built a separate profile for people who score as, lower propensity voters, less trusting, etc. Okay, guys, this stuff is blowing my mind. It's super interesting. This is a snapshot of a little bit of the data for people who match that engaged profile in Wisconsin. What I want to draw your attention to here is that boxes on the top. Newspapers read. Folks who are engaged, I'm sure this is everybody on this call, read newspapers. Foremost, they read their local paper, right? Their local daily, whatever that is. And then, they may read the Washington Post, maybe they read the New York Times. Look also at social media use. These folks are over-indexed, as the comms folks say, on Nextdoor, and they're very high on Facebook as well, right? We're going to talk more about how you can help us, boost stuff on Facebook for a reason, because we want to engage these folks in Wisconsin who are, inclined to be active in politics, may have opinions on these issues. Okay. That disengaged audience looks pretty different. Note again the media data. That disengaged audience, when you query that database for people who are less trusting, vote less frequently, they're not reading newspapers. They're not reading newspapers. So the things that we've been doing on this project and across other states where we get pretty good earned media coverage, we got a nice, couple media hits in Green Bay last week. We cannot assume that this audience sees that. We can't assume that this audience necessarily sees our stuff on Facebook, or they are less likely to, right? Okay, so you take all this, we did these focus groups, we ran these surveys, we got this audience profile data, and with GMMB, we came up with a plan. A lot of credit to GMMB for the plan. This is their plan, which we've adopted. And basically the idea here is to message to, think of it as kind of concentric circles of audiences. Again, everybody on this call, we're the core, we're the engaged. All the stuff that Scott and David and Allison have been doing, we're going to keep doing, right? Keep getting media coverage of our events, work with Keep Our Republic or other partners where appropriate, tours of county election offices, town halls, workshops to get local media. We're going to keep doing that. We also want to figure out how we might recruit folks who can be messengers or ambassadors for this work, for trust in our institutions and loving your fellow Americans who aren't reading those newspapers, who have that different media diet, who are less frequently on Facebook. And this is how we are thinking about those steps. So establish that media footprint, use social media, in particular Facebook and YouTube, to get the word out. The center dot here, enter relevant conversations in real time, right? When current events are happening that we want to talk about, we got to be in the mix. We got to be in that conversation. And then toward the right side of this slide, find different people with different media diets, different profiles, who can also help us strategically break into different audiences. Last thing I'll say about the plan real quick is we've come up with, based on all this research, some underlying messages that we hope to work in across this campaign. I'm not going to read this whole thing to you. Obviously, we'll send you these slides. But I mean, this is, again, this should be like apple pie and motherhood, right? Peaceful disagreement is the cornerstone of our political system. This is America. That's how we do it, right? We disagree on stuff, and that's okay. We all want a better future for our friends and our families, right? So the idea is to engage, across these audiences and across these platforms around some values that we believe, based on this research, should be held by a whole heck of a lot of Wisconsinites and Americans. Okay, now, almost done with the tour de force here. How are we doing this now? How have we been doing this? So the first point is, as we said in that strategy graphic, establish that media footprint. We've been doing that. The Wisconsin team's already been doing that. This is just an example of some media coverage that our North Carolina team garnered a few weeks ago. They've been supporting this big commission in the state that's delivering recommendations on election systems in North Carolina. They had a big event. They got lots of earned local media coverage. That's part of establishing that footprint. All of these states, including WisACT, have their own website, right? We got websites, we got logos, right? We got some branding. This is an example of a screenshot from the website of our Michigan network. And in that case, it's Michiganders for Civic Resilience. We are also pushing information out, right? Here's Governor McCollum. This is just a screenshot from the WisACT newsletter. Governor McCollum, along with some young people he was talking to, right? So think of this piece as reaching that engaged audience, right? This is us reaching that core audience that we know we are more likely to be plugged into. We are also using Facebook for this purpose. Allison has been cranking out Facebook posts for WisACT. This is an example of the statement that our Florida network put out on the evening of the attempted assassination of former President Trump, right? And I know WisACT put out a similar statement. We have also had some success, particularly around the Trump shooting, of getting into the media in real time. So this is former Congressman Ron Barber. He's from Tucson, Arizona. He's our Democratic lead down in Arizona. He was being interviewed on local media in Tucson on the evening of the shooting. He himself was a victim of gun violence. He was quite seriously injured in the shooting that hit Congresswoman Gabby Giffords some years back. So he has a lot to say about the topic. Here's another example. The night of the Trump attempted assassination, our Democratic lead down in Georgia, who's in the job because he's well connected, he reached out to the state House minority leader in Georgia, Dr. James Beverly, and got Dr. Beverly to reach into local media, more left-leaning media, to really, in his own words, condemn what had just occurred, right? Okay, so what's happening next? And this is really sort of where I'm going to segue to Eric, and what we're going to talk about more in a minute. But what we want to talk to you about is, first of all, we want to get your feedback on all this. That's what we're going to do in the breakout sessions. But we're hoping you can help us keep pushing this messaging out, pushing it out to that inner circle of folks who are more engaged, but also helping us to identify those messengers who may have a different media diet than us, maybe a little more skeptical of some of these issues we're working. We're going to keep doing the sort of election education work. We're going to keep doing, tours of election clerk offices and things like that. We're going to share with you content that's just generally opposed to violence or more positive in terms of sharing good vibes about our fellow Americans. And then as we get closer to the fall, as we get more into the election season, we'll get back to you about how we might work through WisACT and maybe other orgs in the state to ensure that if there are problems around the election, we have a plan to respond very quickly, right? So, and Dave and Scott have already been working on this. They're, as some of you know, many of you know, they're setting up a sort of regional structure, who covers which corners of the state, who communicates to who. We will come back to you on how we'd like to build that, and we hope you'd be interested in working with us on that. Last thing I'd say real quick is, we had talked some months ago, for those who were in the initial messaging workshop, about how could we get to that tertiary audience, the unheard, right? People who, are on like gaming platforms. They're not even on, TikTok. And we decided to table this for now. We don't have the time or the budget between now and November, December, January to reach that audience. They're hard to reach. It is interesting to think about, though, if we have a little more time to breathe, in 2025, are there ways we could experiment with reaching a very different audience around some of these questions? But let me stop there. I know I threw a lot at you. Any, questions about this, or major burning questions for me before I turn it over to Eric?
I have one question, Nathan. Mary Beth Collins from the Health of Wisconsin Initiative. I've been thinking a lot about, and I might be working on this anyway, but I'm really glad to be here today to get this part of it, sort of understand what you all are doing with messaging. But one thing I've been thinking about is that having kind of a network analysis right now, just not like comprehensive and not like super clean and like presentable or anything like that, but a network analysis of the different groups that are doing work in the next 3 months around a safe and secure election, sort of trust in election results. I just think that might still be a gap that's needed. So that if WisACT is really focusing on these like messaging strategies, but there are other groups that have like another angle on it, we are at least aware of how to like make sure that those intersections are leveraged. Just even our humble initiative hosted an event in April where we had 10 national organizations on the stage that are all in Wisconsin to do this work. And I'm still going to events on the weekly with organizations that weren't necessarily at that event. So like, it just seems like some sort of a sketch of that might be useful for everyone to have like informally behind the scenes. And I guess I'm raising my hand to say that if anybody wants to work on that, if it's already happening, that I'd love to tap in or help facilitate.
Mary Beth, and that's a really good question. Um, one of your advisory board members is putting that together. Dr. Doug Erke, University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, with the nonprofit organization there, is tasked for us in putting together because there are a lot of people with overlap and going on. You're exactly right. So we're looking to create a directory in Wisconsin of these various organizations, and you're working with a number of them already.
Yeah, and I would say we have some of that already built. So I'll confer with Doug. I think, that existing in a like porous way across the different groups doing this work might be how I would suggest that it be done as opposed to like one organization holding it. So we can follow up, but if folks are open to that, I think that would be beneficial. And I see Kathy here today and Lisa of URA, and that the inventory, is already happening in some ways, but it would be good to also maybe have contact info and brief descriptions so that if you see an immediate need, especially with the time sensitivity of what Nathan's talking about, it could be deployed quickly.
Yeah, this is it's great to see you, Mary Beth, and great point. And I didn't get to this, but it is definitely part of our vision to coordinate as much as possible with actors in Wisconsin and nationally, right? There are other orgs doing work in this lane. The more we can amplify each other's stuff, the better. To be perfectly candid, like it's been a process just getting our ducks in a row and figuring out the distribution mechanics and the graphics and then yada yada yada. But we're getting there. And once we get like our little, the WisACT machine up and running, the next step is to figure out, how do we be as synergistic as possible with everybody else? And I'm sure we can do it. But I do want to give some time to Eric to share his side of this.
Perfect. Thanks, Nathan. So I appreciate everybody's time today. As was mentioned at the top, my name is Eric Conrad. I'm a vice president here at GMMB. We're a international, we do global work too, but strategic communications firm. I'm joined by Henna, who is the state coordinator here with Michigan and Wisconsin. She works with both states. And we're really excited to kind of dive into this a little bit further, go beyond just kind of Nathan's layout there of the strategy of how we got here, and now what we're thinking about what to do with some of those next steps he laid out and how we view them. I think it's really important to kind of like, we view communications from a tactics follow strategy, and strategy is nestled within goals. So if we don't have strategies that are helping to reach a goal, then it's not a useful strategy. So we're going to start by just talking through a few of the goals that we kind of laid out here as a group to make sure we know where we're going, talk about how the landscape affects us achieving those goals, and then go into what role we think you all could play in helping us achieve those goals and why we're really so happy to have you all here today. So I'm now going to attempt to share and make sure that it is you are seeing what you need to see here. 1 second. Okay, if anybody wants to give me a thumbs up, I see a nod from Nathan. I'm going, great. So to that point, some strategy and planning here. The way we're kind of viewing this is, it's moving? Yes, it's moving, great. Like I said, we're gonna do a little bit of landscape overview, strategy, planning, and then we'll kind of go into like some of that message delivery that Nathan was talking about, the social content. So when we think about first kind of the strategic goals we're working with, all of the largest level, I don't know, I'm not going to like zoom through these, but Nathan kind of touches on some of this in his presentation, so I don't want to overemphasize them. All of the states are working at some level to work with individuals and community partners to change norms about anti-democratic and violent behavior, making that seem more unacceptable. We already saw that number that Nathan laid out there, that 83 or so percent. We want that to be bigger. We want even more people to think that it's unacceptably violent around the outcome of an election. We also want to empower, communities, people, skills with the skills to reduce that violence or identity and political violence, and increase in trust in elections for those that are either distrustful or disengaged of how elections are conducted. So when we think about that, what do we think that means on the state level, right? Like, what does that mean for this organization here? All of you here being connected to the political actors, community members, and officials, that's already going on. That's already great. You all are here, and that's part of like the first step of this. The next, though, is like making sure that we're thinking about the messengers and audience that our audiences listen to. So really getting to that point of, you remember those concentric circles Nathan showed you, a lot of us, all of us, are in those some of those core central circles. But most of us probably have people outside of those circles that listen to us. Or we know people that might reach into those other circles that we can help share this messaging and share this information with. So the more that we can create that interconnected network, the better we can get messages out to more and more people outside of just the people that are necessarily engaged. So that's why we're really thinking of that. Obviously, to do that though, you need to have regular internal and external communications that you trust to be accurate and useful. And we want to make sure that we're prepared to respond in those crisis situations. Obviously, like we know there's some major moments on the calendar, but there are the things we don't know. And there are things but it helps us to think about, when our ballot deadlines, when our certification deadlines, when our court challenges have to be settled, all these things that can help us plan ahead for what do we need to be ready for. So thinking through that kind of gets us to what we want to do, like what we know, right? So laying out some of those kind of moments, we know that some of the more normal events in a political cycle, like debates and conventions, those shifted forward somewhat this cycle. But the interesting thing we're seeing as media strategists is that hasn't necessarily brought a whole bunch of attention with it. There's the political junkies, the people that care about these things that are very engaged and following all the updates right now. But the average voter doesn't pay attention until after election day, and the people that aren't regular voters pay even less attention, because why do they care about voting if they're not actually like a high propensity voter? So when we're thinking about what it means to bring these people in and bring them more attention and build their trust in systems, we're just because the things are going on in our world doesn't mean it's going on in their world now, and it's probably not going to end up really being a focus for them for another month or so. So we're thinking about this now so that we can be prepared for when their attention starts shifting to us. The other thing we're seeing here, and I may mention here, is just there is historic levels of people that were not paying attention to what we call like traditional news or political news. This is something we're seeing across a lot of different client spaces and a lot of different client areas. There's just less trust in media, and then if you generally think of current events as either depressing or anxiety inducing, you're just less likely to use it. They also are more likely, because in general Americans are more able to tailor their interests to specific things. So like if they were reading the newspaper really because they wanted the sports scores, they can just go to a sports website right now. If they were really curious in cultural commentary, they can go to blogs that talk about their favorite TV shows or movies. If they don't have to engage with a local media source for everything, they're less likely to do it now, which means less engagement on a tangential level to political news, updates like that. So we're also just people that are tuning out things they don't want to really listen to. We also know, obviously, things are going to get more busy, a lot less busy. People are going to get more tense, more passionate in the next run-up. We know Wisconsin is obviously one of those like 2 or 3 tipping states that all the presidential campaigns and the Senate committees are looking at. So we know there's only going to be more passion as we go forward here. So what can we do to prepare for those moments and be ready for them? And then to this last part that was raised just in the last conversation, there are way more grassroots and grasstops organizations focused on the administration of elections than there have been in the past. So, and that comes along with journalists that are more focused on elections administration and content creators. So it's not just in the past where you might have had like a couple of really big political reporters and they covered everything from how the election was conducted to the outcomes of the election. Now you have national outlets that are just focused on elections administration and like threats to it, as opposed to the partisan outcome of an election. All of this fits into how we think about who we need to reach and what messages we can get out there to make sure we're not just reaching the people that care about this immediately right now, but the people that will hopefully can start getting their attention and start getting them to care more as we go forward. Thinking about this in strategic terms, we like to think long-term goals because short and medium terms in our mind should ladder up to long-term goals. I don't want to if there isn't a plan to reach a long-term goal, then we don't have a good plan. So then we don't have a good long-term goal. So this is just an example of, again, don't need to really go deep into these, but we want to foster collective community beyond the idea of just voting, right? If this is something that this goes to some of Nathan's, like, this is partially a vibes thing, right? Like, it's not just that we need people to necessarily know whether they are engaged or not engaged with politics. We want to reduce what we call the identity-based violence too, because if people can see each other as part of the same community and each other as humans, then hopefully the politics won't get in the way of how they dislike or like someone as well. So the more that we can foster collective community, not just foster the idea of being a voter, we think that's a positive towards reducing political and identity-based violence. We also want, obviously, to demonstrate the importance of peaceful disagreement, because that's something that if people see that they can peacefully disagree and work within a policy or political space to work out their disagreements, then they're less likely to become frustrated, disengaged, more likely to commit violence on behalf of a political problem, because they think they have other ways to do that, and they can work with people and they respect the people that they know to work through these disagreements with them. Along with that comes hopefully increasing faith in the ability of government to work for communities among those who are distrustful. This one obviously could depend based on who we're trying to reach out to. There's a lot of distrust in government that can run very deep, but there's also a lot of sometimes misallocation of anger towards, for example, Washington or Congress or specific social issues, as opposed to does my trash get picked up? Does my mail get delivered? Do my lights turn on? Like, do the firefighters come if there's a fire? These core functions of government that we kind of take for granted, and at the community level is very much somewhere where people have to come together and agree on these things. So like, especially with something that we didn't talk about in Nathan's presentation, but a lot of the polling shows that it's a bipartisan agreement. There's bipartisan agreement around trust in local government at a 60+% value for across a lot of our states, that people agree that that local government is something that they actually still have confidence in. State, it tends to decline more, and then national, it declines a lot. But like, that's something that the more we can increase at least faith and hopefully the ability of communities to work together in government, then hopefully we can expand some of that trust out to other forms of political engagement as well. And then the last piece here is that, like, when we say demonstrating that election officials are trying to support the right to vote, this obviously can come up in a lot of different ways, but in general, this is the idea that there isn't some vast conspiracy of supervisors of elections to invalidate results. Like, in general, people don't go into this because they don't want people to vote. If you're an elected official that believes in democracy, that is elected through a democratic process, in general, they are trying to ensure that people have the right to vote. So that's something that we look at those long term, but we think as part of building the faith in the process as well, if there's a broader consensus that no one's trying to harm it. So, like I said, long term goals, these are the stuff that we're looking at January and beyond, right? Like, this is the long term pieces, but how do we get here? How did we achieve these things? That's where we get into the short and medium term, which are a little more tactical. So if we're thinking about intermediary, I'm starting from the bottom up here. We want to make sure you all and WisACT is a bipartisan educational resource for Wisconsinites. That's already going. Scott and David have been doing an amazing job going all over the state, holding these listening tours, showing their not just their already existing knowledge, but learning from and listening to the people around them to make sure that they can be a useful resource for people. Developing the tools to rapidly respond. That's what part of this training is part of, making sure that there's the resources that you will have. And then positioning WisACT also as a third-party convener to allow for disagreement across the aisle and discussion. I'll get to that one in the last part here in a second. Short term, like now, right? We started this has been going on for now, but now we're getting to the months of into August, because we want to get kind of like this system moving before Labor Day, where people start paying attention, which is increasing reach through web events and webinars like this, deploying digital and earn tactics, recruiting messengers not currently connected to the DRM. All of this is the stuff that we're like really focused on the run up to the end of this month, and then through all the way till January. And I want to bring back this third party convener part here at the end, because for those of you that have been through political cycles, I'm sure a lot of you have or paid attention in this periods, there's obviously a lot of partisan conversation that happens all the way up till November. And that's usually the norm, right? Like like ads have to come down, the election stops being run on election day after polls close. And usually there are norms around a lot of people get a little quiet. They want to see what the results are. They don't want to they're a little quieter. But then also the people that don't necessarily trust the outcome or might want to so distrust the outcome will get louder. And sometimes those are partisan forces, sometimes those aren't. But what we want to make sure is that as voices come down, that there are people that are lifted up that are cross-partisan, that can be trusted by media, that can come in as a convener on both sides, which is really part of what WisACT's trying to do here. And what we want you all to be able to be equipped to do is to present facts that build this faith and community and doesn't allow some of the more and misinformation that isn't based in fact to seep out there when we see in a post-election period some of that probably starting up. And I'm gonna not rush through these, but want to make sure we have time at the end here because we're going to have a bit of a discussion on the some breakout groups on this as well. So what this looks like from our side, jumped there a bit, is stuff you've already been seeing, events and webinars. Going to be there already these specifics to you have all these regional groups and chapters and organizing that's happening. That's providing great opportunities for press and social content. We always think about making sure that the message and the content gets out of the room, not just stays in the room. Earned media is a big part of that, and Scott and David have been doing a great job here of these in-person events. I was lucky to be able to come up to Milwaukee and help you all with the launch that we had back a few months ago, and that was a fantastic event. It's got some great coverage around that. But also it's, as legitimacy provides more content for social as well. All these pieces are in this. Reactive messaging is the one that's really going to be picking up here. So where we can have statements and talking points, letters to the editor for what we see in the news to be able to say, hey, this happened. Make sure we position WisACT as an expert in this space by being able to be quick and respond to these things. But then we also want to think about additional tools. We want to think about what you need, right? So, we can do media trainings, elevator pitches, scripts, but thinking about the people in this room, if you have a group of people that you want to be able to talk to, or you need to be able to reach, or you think of there's that email list or that community convening you go to, what would help you communicate in those spaces and be an ambassador for this type of work to your audiences? That's the things we want to think about here too, because we want to make sure this isn't a copy and paste. We want to make sure it fits, as anybody in here that does communications knows, you want your message to meet your audience where they are. And we're starting from baseline that we think is effective based on all the data and research we have, but you all are the experts about the people you talk to, and you're the most effective messengers to those audiences. So we want to make sure you have the tools you need to be able to communicate with those groups as best as possible. So one of the things that we think about here, and we want to just kind of give an example of how we're thinking about this, when we think about, Wisconsin's disengaged, they are not avid election news consumers. Who are the trusted messengers that we should be thinking about there? Is there more faith-based outreach we can be thinking about? Is there educational content they need? That's kind of the next steps we're working through, and we want to work through with you, and how to make sure that we can be effective in reaching these audiences. One of the ways we're doing that, and then just the preview of this, is social content, making sure that there's stuff out there that people can organically engage with. So this is one example of some of the template materials where we've developed, and we're working with Scott and David and the team there to make sure that there's a suite of materials that you all will see showing up on WisACT social, but then also be able to, get an email or roundup of them every week or so saying, hey, here's the content that you can push out to your channels if you like, that comes along with facts and information about what is useful and what's coming up, and resources that people who might not really be engaged yet could use to build their trust and faith in the process going forward. Just a little bit on influencers here. When I've been throwing a couple of terms around here. Influencers is part of this. We view that, influencers is one version of this. It's somebody that, and when we say influencers, I'm not talking about like a Mr. Beast or Oprah. Like, we're not talking about necessarily people that have millions and millions of followers. We're talking about people in your communities that have 500 followers, 1,000 followers, 2,000 followers. That could be some of you right here that have an audience that reaches people. That's anybody that can inspire action, that anybody that can use your platform to share this information out. We're kind of viewing you all here as ambassadors. You're folks that could, in theory, have a long-term relationship with this brand, democracy, and can help represent this brand by sharing information out to the people that trust you. Last one here is industry experts. Groups that we're also thinking about, so reporters, journalists, folks that care about these issues but aren't necessarily going to be like in it every day. That's the other part of this, is that all of these will kind of play into this, but the first thing we have to start from is what is the content that will best match their need that they'll use, and that we think will actually help reach out and push to those audience, the groups that we're trying to bring into this. So, as I said, you are now an ambassador. We christened you all. We're going to be sending out some regular content. You know, we hope that you all will join us in this process. We can help to get you what you need. That hopefully you'll be able to like basically just click on post and share out content as you see it is available, or change it, make your own edits, put it in your voice. We want to provide you with what you need to be able to be on the front lines of making sure people can have as much trust and belief in that this system is as fair as as human beings can make it, and that we can get this out to those people. So I'm gonna throw it back to the team here so we can get into some breakout rooms. We're looking forward to kind of getting your thoughts and feedback on, does this make sense? Are there things that we're not thinking about? I will just say this is a condensed version of all of the planning and strategy we're doing, so we're very excited to hear if you have additional thoughts. And hopefully we can think about ways that we can best tailor whatever this is towards what you might feel comfortable doing, and how the best way you can be messengers to your audiences. So I'm gonna stop there.
Thank you so much, Eric. That was wonderful. And thanks to Nathan as well. That was a very comprehensive overview of sort of who we're trying to reach and how we're going to do it. So with all of that being said, we're going to go into breakout rooms for a good 10 minutes. We'll pull you back at about 12:55 to share out what y'all talked about, but I'm posting a few questions in the chat that we'd like you to consider. So number one being just generally, do you have any feedback on the presentations we just shared? Do you have anything that sort of jumped out at you? Any questions? Two being, who else should we invite to this effort? How do we expand our reach amongst quote unquote engaged and quote unquote disengaged audience members? And three, lastly, how can you engage with your local media? So be thinking about the sort of media that's around you and how you might be able to contact them and spread our messaging via those avenues. I'm about to launch the breakout rooms. There are about 5 to 7 folks in each one. And someone from WisACT or GMMB or Nathan will be in each room to sort of guide them. So launching the rooms now. Let me know if anyone has any issues accessing their breakout rooms, but feel free to join those as you wish and start chatting. All right, we have about a minute till everyone will be back. Jim and Ruth, where are you calling from in Illinois?
We're in Bartlett.
Right, so, yeah, we're west of Schaumburg.
Oh, great. I'm in the LaGrange, Western Springs, Hinsdale area.
Okay.
Welcome
Yep, we
back.
have some relatives there,
Oh, great.
And in Wisconsin.
and in Wisconsin, yes.
Welcome back, everyone.
There we go.
Kathy didn't get her 13 seconds, but
That's
we'll
right.
Sorry, Dave Hoover. We'll get to your question too. Sorry about that. We got
All right, thanks.
All right, I know we only have a few minutes left. I wanted to send a link to, we are developing a WhatsApp group for rapid response for WisACT. So if there are any breaking events or breaking news that we wish to respond to, we're going to be texting in this WhatsApp group. So if you don't already have the WhatsApp app, it's free. It just connects to your phone number. It's really simple to set up. I'm going to be sending the join link in the chat now, but if you're not quite ready to join yet, it's going to be in the follow-up email that you'll get tomorrow morning with the slide deck, links to our LinkedIn, links to our Facebook. So all of that good information will be relayed to you tomorrow. But this is the link to the WhatsApp for right now. I also wanted to launch a brief poll that just sort of asks you what your preferred. Oh, it's up right now. So it asks, are you willing to share this kind of weekly messaging via your social media channels, meaning your private Facebook, your Instagram, your LinkedIn? And question number 2 being, are you comfortable with other roles as a messenger, like talking to the media, drafting letters to the editor? We talked a little bit in our group about that. Oh, so I see some folks rolling in. Thank you, everyone. And I'm sorry that we don't have too much more time for folks to share out what they talked about in their groups. I hope that was a productive conversation that y'all had, and we'll be talking to Eric and Nathan and David. Scott, we'll all have a little convening to talk about what your groups all talked about and raise those questions up. But if you have anything that's sort of still on your heart and your chest and you want to communicate that, feel free to shoot me an email. I'll send my email in the chat right now, and we'll make sure that that gets to all of us. Woo, thank you everyone for answering the poll. This is great. All right, I just sent my email in the chat. Feel free to email me anytime. Great. Few folks left to answer the poll before we close it, but this is great. It seems like many of you are willing to share on your own channels, and even more folks are willing to contribute by speaking to the media or drafting letters to the editor. So that's great.
Comment. Let's have fun with it.
And thank you so much to Nathan and Eric again for taking the time and presenting to us today. It was wonderful. They're great resources that WisACT has, and just great individuals to have on our team. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having us, everybody.
All right, it's 1 o'clock. Thank you all for giving us an hour. I want to be respectful of your time, but again, feel free to contact us. And yeah, thanks everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Really appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Send us questions.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Bye, everyone.